when you consciously choose to do something, would you ever do something that you would do other than to relieve suffering? So, and that suffering mainly being the cognitive dissonance that happens if you do something other than what you believe you should do. And so in this sort of psychological egoism, what I think is happening is that you have a person who does something, and other people might describe that as altruistic. For example, there was a story of a man who they were on a boat and his wife was swimming in the water in the ocean. He was on deck and he saw, as his wife is coming in, that there's a shark coming in to attack her. So in his seeming altruism, he dived in between the shark and the wife, and he was then attacked by the shark and died, and his wife was saved. And though this is altruism, because it's the only kind of altruism that we can have, it still was motivated and done in terms of the perspective of that gentleman standing on the boat observing his wife. He felt such suffering watching the shark come in to eat her, that to relieve the suffering, and therefore it becomes a selfish act, or self-centered act, I should say rather, he dives in to save his wife. Now, I've done the same thing, or a very similar thing, in Paris, in the underground metro. My daughter was running under a train. I happily sprinted to dive between the train and her, though I knew that wouldn't really make much difference, but I was still absolutely going there. And in retrospect, analysing my motivations at the time, they were absolutely, though apparently they were altruistic, they were actually totally motivated, self-motivated actions that I took purely to relieve my suffering of watching my daughter being ran over by that train. And so I would have, on my epitaph, I would have liked for it to read, died in the selfish act of altruism. Because that, or the self-centered act of altruism, because I believe, and I'm totally willing and open to if I can see evidence otherwise, but I just don't see how, if you make a conscious decision to do anything, even if it's something that doesn't benefit you in one way, it's still, like, for example, there was no benefit to me jumping under the train, but it was done out of me gaining benefit of relief of the extreme suffering that I was enduring watching my daughter being run over by the train without doing something about it. And so I believe that in this psychological egoism, that you just cannot do a genuinely altruistic act, which would be implying that you are genuinely doing it in a way that it will cause you suffering and relieve the suffering of another. Because you always, even if you know that, for example, like me in that situation, I might endure some physical suffering, my mental suffering was so much stronger than that, that it really diminished any importance of the physical suffering to insignificance. And at that point, if you stopped me whilst I'm running to jump in front of the train, it certainly, I was aware that I would be mangled and potentially like cut in bits and be there for, you know, God knows how long, dying whilst I'm like decapitated and stuff. But I was still absolutely willing to do that because of the cognitive dissonance of seeing how much suffering it was causing me to see that my daughter was in danger. And so that's that kind of concept where, now it's sort of, the complicated aspect of it is that there's several things that it doesn't mean, but that's definitely the part of it that it does mean, is that you all of these seemingly altruistic acts are actually because of, and it's usually cognitive dissonance, that you are actually suffering, or you envision yourself suffering more if you don't help that other person, even if it causes you other types of suffering. There is a higher suffering, like usually it's a moral-based suffering, which I guess as a person who has high morality, you're going to seem more altruistic because your natural constitution creates such suffering out of watching other people and other animals suffering that you're going to seem like you're altruistic. But in actual fact, all you are is just a person who was born into a body or somehow acquired the conscious belief or conscious kind of concepts where seeing other people suffering, and it might be upbringing, you know, it might be, I was brought up in a very, like in my family, to watch another suffer and not do something about it would be something so incongruent with the way that we would behave in our family. The decorum was always that if you see somebody suffering, you do everything you can to relieve their suffering. And perhaps it is from that kind of upbringing that I have then acquired, and other people have acquired, this unconscious constitution where you then feel such a huge amount of suffering by watching other people or other beings suffer that you would in fact happily take on a lot of suffering yourself just to alleviate their suffering. But you still are doing it because of a self-centered suffering from the belief system that it hurts you to watch other people being hurt even more than it would hurt to be hurt yourself. Yeah, so that's the self-centered altruism of psychological egoism. Yeah.